Welcome to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series, brought to you by the C.T. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. We're having a conversation about work-life balance, how to navigate and overcome challenges within your career, and how to make business more accommodating to a diverse workforce.
Welcome. This is Emma Shafelvegi. I am faculty and director of digital learning at the C.T. Bauer College of Business. Today, I am speaking with Olivia Miljanic from the Department of Management and Leadership. She is the faculty director of the full-time MBA program. And also with us is Marina Sebastianovic from the Department of Management and Leadership, who is the faculty director of the professional MBA program. Today, we're going to be talking about teaching and learning at the C.T. Bauer College of Business, and we hope you enjoy our conversations. Olivia and Marina, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on your recent teaching awards. You have both won Bauer College teaching awards recently, and Marina, you have won one of the University of Houston teaching awards. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or the team teaching
group award,
individual
to be fair. Yeah.
All right. And that was for the Department of Management and Leadership?
Yes, it was for our learning abroad programs.
All right. And Olivia, you won the Payne Teaching Excellence Award. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your best class or your ideal class, and regardless of class size or format, what I have found works for me is when I'm connecting with students because of my shared experiences that I'm sharing with them about what I've done in the field, what I've done as a consultant, what I've done as a student. And that's one way for me to reach my students. Who would like to go first and talk about their best class or their ideal class?
I can go first. Thank you very much, Amisha, for organizing this podcast and inviting us today. The class that I have in mind that I'd like to talk a little bit about is an executive MBA class. It's our international business residency. And typically, this course is a study abroad course. So there is certainly an academic aspect to the course, but the course also usually features a trip to a particular part of the world. It could be one country, it could be a couple of countries. And as part of the trip, there would be business visits and discussions with business representatives, sometimes governmental representatives from the respective countries that are being visited. And of course, also opportunities to have an immersion experience, a cultural immersion experience as well in the country. And this summer, because of the COVID public health crisis, we were not able to travel as we usually would. And so there was quite a bit of stress and anxiety around organizing this course. The students were understandably so disappointed that they were really looking forward to this experience and they were not going to get it, but they still had to take the course. The course was part of their degree. And they had a lot of questions as to how is that going to play out and how could anything that we were possibly going to do come even close to replicating the experience of going abroad. It was hard. It was hard to go into the course with students who had very low expectations of what we could possibly make happen. And it actually ended up being a really good experience for everyone involved. And some of the main components, we had a lot of speakers. So we had a lot of experts and business representatives from the countries that we would have otherwise visited. And in fact, as we were doing all of this virtually, we were able to cover a broader range. We had journal entries that I would have normally asked the students to journal on their experiences in the country. But since we were not in the country to simulate that, I asked them to read news to stay up, to stay on top of the news, and to journal with their reflections on what they were reading and what they were learning about what was happening in the specific country that they were following, right as the course was going on. And they had to do reports where they had to identify a business opportunity and develop accordingly a business plan in one of the countries of our focus. And part of that, they had to analyze the political and economic environment for business in those countries. And this again, when I first presented these reports to the students, they felt a bit uneasy and they weren't sure about them. But it turned out that it was an opportunity for them to learn more about their own companies. These students are all executives who are working, and they had an opportunity to learn more about their own companies, to further develop their own interests, to connect with people who were working perhaps in offices or were thinking about opening offices and pursuing opportunities in these countries that they were studying. And they became the experts at their workplace many times. Several of them shared that with me after the course.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's certainly an angle I've not considered, how the transition would work with such a class during the pandemic. Thank you so much. Marina?
You started with a tough question, Mesh. I'm thinking back on all my classes and now 15 years of teaching. I'm proud, not that I'm counting. And it's hard to single one out, but I guess it would be one of the classes that I'm currently teaching because I'm always improving, or at least I like to think so. So, the new class, the one that I'm teaching now, is always better than the one that I've taught in the last semester. So the class that I'm teaching right now is a work stress class. It's a fairly small class, it's 50 students. And we really get to dig deep into this topic of work stress, which is, by the way, one of my passions. And it's not even so much about the topic as much as it is about just the variety of pedagogical approaches I've tried to incorporate in the course. After attending all these conferences, reading up on the current best practices, I really try to put together a little packaged course that would incorporate all the best of everything. So I just find it to be a very high level, very dynamic course in which it's not just about, lectures and assignments and exams. There are a lot of simulations, group projects. There's a lot of personalized work in the sense of the students have to self-reflect, which is a huge part of work stress. So all of that combined, and by the way, in an asynchronous course, I think is going to be a really fun experience. Now, this is what I have planned for the semester. The way the semester will actually play out might be different. So we might have to do a part 2 of this podcast, and I'll tell you how it goes. But I believe that this course is one of the best ones.
And I like how both of you mentioned updating and changing with both the times and with your own practices. And you also both mentioned reflections in your practice. We're in a business college and you incorporate writing in your courses. I find that terrific. And I think that's so powerful to do. How do you do that? How many students are you, the work stress class, how many students does that have?
50.
Okay, well, that's quite a bit to go through and read.
So I think my blessing here is that I'm usually teaching a 250 student course. So when I get 50, I feel like it's a breeze. It's nothing. Grading 50 papers.
It's a small class.
It just takes a day or two. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many classes were in your class, Olivia?
20 students. So that was much more manageable from that point of view.
Right. I feel like there's a paper in there about reflective writing. So stay tuned for that. So you both mentioned you changed. Olivia, you mentioned that you got feedback from students. Marina, what is your feedback process for your class? How do you know that it's working?
That's a tough one. Obviously, we have course evaluations. We have this formal communication. But I find that when I hold classes in the semester where I literally have to kick people out, either out of the Melcher Hall auditorium because the next class is coming in, and many times I've interrupted you, Mesh, so I know you've had those classes as well, where students are so passionate about talking about that day's topic, they can't stop, right? That's when I know I've succeeded. So that's my little hint.
Yeah, for me, it's also feedback from the students. And again, as Marina mentioned, of course, the traditional course evaluations. I also try to do more informal mid-semester course evaluations. And I also explicitly encourage students to provide feedback. And as soon as I get feedback, I show them that how I have considered it and which parts of it have I actually implemented. And I think that as students see that I do take their feedback seriously, then they're more likely to continue to give it. And with the course that I mentioned earlier, the International Business Residency course that I taught this summer, I kept in touch with the students, or the students kept in touch with me after the course. Again, that I encouraged them to do so, but they took me up on it, which was great. And I continued to get feedback from them throughout. So we had, in order to replicate or try to replicate the cultural immersion experience, we were lucky that conditions allowed us to actually have a dinner at the Latin American restaurant, which was a region that we were focusing on at the end of the course. And so we were able to talk quite a bit at that event that was wrapping up the course. And so I got a lot of feedback from the students on that occasion. And then afterwards, I kept getting emails and students would tell me, today at work, the upper management of our company announced a successful bid on a natural gas pipeline in Brazil, but they couldn't disclose details because of confidentiality issues. And then afterwards, after that meeting, I was talking to my colleagues and I told them why I thought that that bid had been made and why Brazil had been chosen, because that's what I had been studying as part of the course. And then I have another student who writes me and tells me, at my company, I wasn't that excited about writing this report, but then I realized as I was doing it that it gave me an opportunity to learn more about my company and to meet more people in the company who are working on or in offices in the countries that we were looking at. And then at the end of it, they asked me if they could read my paper and that they might actually put it to use, that the company might use it. And I wasn't so sure if my paper was good enough, but I was very proud and excited that was the case. So that's how I know that it's working. And also connections, again, in this course, I keep going back to it. While we had one of our sessions with one of the speakers from Guatemala in this case, and the students had questions for the speaker about what were the business opportunities that particular speaker would have identified. What did he think was the next big thing for his country specifically, or for Central America or Latin America more broadly? And it turned out that one of the students and that particular speaker actually connected. They both had experience and interest in waste management. And the speaker from Guatemala strongly believed that that was a field where there was a lot of opportunity. And so they forged that connection, which may very well lead in the future to an actual business venture.
That's awesome. I always find it exciting when a reluctant student becomes your advocate in many ways. In many cases, and this is certainly true in my case, that I teach a foundational course where students may come in not fully understanding why it's a requirement to learn the skills that I teach or to work with data. And then at the end of the course, or 3 months or 6 months or a couple of years later, I get messages on Instagram or get an email, or someone adds me on LinkedIn and tells me how important something is in retrospect. Do you have students come back, Marina, and talk to you about your course?
Yes, all the time, about the course, about the projects that they've done in the course. Like I said, my goal is to always personalize content. So whether it's working on their own stress portfolio or working on their career plan. I mean, I've had students, email me, hey, remember that career plan I submitted a couple of years ago? Do you still have it? Right? Because they obviously, for some reason, need it and it's relevant in their lives. So yeah, it's always a really nice perk of this job, is having people reach out back to you and tell you that something that you've done remained in their memory and is making some difference in their life.
I think that's a definite perk of being a teacher. And being able to work with so many students may be overwhelming at times, but I think altogether it's something that can help sustain you, especially during the pandemic. I think these conversations are important, and being able to reach students and to have an impact is especially meaningful. So you mentioned culture. And I think this is something that we always go back to, that the three of us share. a cultural heritage. In many regards, we are similar because of our upbringing, because of our Central Eastern or Eastern European roots. How do you think that has impacted your experiences as an educator, or how has the US reshaped your experiences as an educator?
Oh my goodness.
And I can talk, and I can talk about mine if you need time to talk, because this is something that I just threw in there.
You did throw it in there. And actually, I think there's a paper in that one too, Mesh. So we have another one. So it's been absolutely transformational. Actually, as I was getting ready for this podcast, I was thinking, my first, I don't know, maybe 15 years of education in the old country, right, in Eastern Europe, the teaching approach is much different. There's a sage on the stage. It's the guy or the girl who has all the wisdom, and they tell you the wisdom, and you take it and you go home with it and you memorize it. Obviously, the education system in the United States is much different. So, even my first teaching style, I remember my first classes, I would, prepare the PowerPoint, I would talk for a full hour, and I thought I had a great class if I remembered every definition and every detail and nobody asked the question, and I just, I rocked it. I had a great performance. With time, I've noticed that that's not what students want, right? They don't want to listen to me. They want to be active participants in this learning experience. And this was the transformation that I just referred to. Is the idea of letting go. That's why they call it the art of letting go, because it's so difficult. Because I always feared that if I let go of control in the class, if I let students participate, I won't be able to get it back. I was at that time barely 30, very shy, non-confrontational person. And I thought if I let it go, that's it. The class is going away. But with time, I realized that my job really is to be that facilitator, to have them lead the discussion, obviously within the course topics, but to have them take the wheel. So yeah, it was a very transformational experience. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and that was my line as well. That traditional background, and then letting go or allowing myself to be vulnerable, or in my case, oftentimes crashing things, because I use Excel in class a lot. So it is a teachable moment when something goes wrong, and how to fix it, and how you try to maintain grace and go with all of that. All right, Olivia, what are your thoughts on this?
So I had a very similar experience in terms of the living the difference in pedagogical approaches and educational systems. I came to the US for the first time as an exchange student when I was a sophomore in high school. And I was extraordinarily lucky to have fantastic teachers at my public high school in Fruitland, Idaho. And I learned a lot. They really inspired me to this day. I look back, they're my role models. And I love their style of teaching so much that it made me want to come back to the US and pursue a degree in the social sciences and teach in this field in the US. And exactly these notions that both Umesh and Marina have described, really having students be not talked at, but they're really taking the lead. They're the ones who are creating the experience, and the pedagogue is there as a facilitator, not as the sage on the stage, as Marina so nicely put it. I also, just to give it a little bit of a different angle in terms of my background, and I'm pretty sure that applies to you too as well. I use it in my courses, since my courses are about international business, different aspects, different dimensions of international business and globalization. Oftentimes I start my courses telling my life story in the context of globalization, in the context of the economic history of globalization. And then I spend the rest of the semester bringing that story home for my students and helping them identify their stories and identify how globalization in its many different manifestations is present and relevant in their lives, in their everyday lives, personally and professionally. And I think that's really important. And I've noticed that this is, you started with a statement on this, Mesh, and then Marina so nicely talked about the personalized work that she does with her students in her classes. I think that's so important, is showing them, sharing our own experiences and showing them how it's relevant to us, but then even more importantly, helping them identify how it's relevant to them.
And I think that that allows for us to connect on not just the academic, but the human level. And I, especially in this day and age, especially with the global pandemic, it's important for us to maintain our humanity. And we're compassionate, we're helpful, but we're also offering sort of a guiding light of career opportunities somewhere down the line. So I that helps me personally, because this time has not been easy on any of us, but I think having that purpose, no matter how corny or cheesy it may sound, I think that's something that can propel us forward. And I wanted to ask you about advice for students for coping with all of this, so how to refocus on your or academics and how to overcome adversity. Is there something that you found works, or is it always personalized? How do you approach assisting students in an asynchronous or an asynchronous format? Do you have any advice on that?
So in an asynchronous course, and I'm teaching a few of those right now and I have been for the last year, I realized that I need to realize that I'm not the person who's going to be able to provide all the support to the students, but also that I can rely on other students in that class. And for that reason, even in an asynchronous course, students may hate me for this, but I have group work. And obviously the rules of that group work are much different than I understand that they cannot maybe meet face-to-face. So, group work has been adjusted, and I use the term loosely, but I found that organizing these smaller communities of 5 or so students where they can open up to each other, it's very hard to open up to 50 screens or 50 squares on a Zoom screen, but creating platforms where they get to interact, where they have to interact. I know some support happens over there from just conversations that I'm having with the students. So one way to alleviate some of the stress is through social support. Like I said, work stress is my passion, and this is supported by research. Providing support and getting support both can alleviate some of that stress that all of us are facing.
I don't currently have group work in the more traditional sense in my large asynchronous courses, although, and it's probably mostly my own fear that I need to overcome, but I need to talk to Marina more about it and to mention to David, and I certainly want to seriously consider incorporating that. But what I am doing currently that's working well, a few things. One, I've just tried this out this semester for the first time. The first couple of weeks of the course, and I was inspired, at least in part, by Marina on this shared practices community. I have asked students to do online discussions where they were introducing themselves, and then they had to read the introductions of other classmates. And this was actually, come to think of it, this was done in groups in some definition of the term, because I have students choose a country that they work on throughout the semester, and then for logistical purposes, the students who have signed up for a particular country also represent the group. So the online discussions happen within that group, that subset of the large course. And so within that group, they read each other's introductions, and they have to find people that they relate to, that they find that they have something in common, something called their attention from this other student's introduction, and then they reach out to them and they communicate. And so that was one of the first assignments, and then a subsequent assignment that was asking them to, this was really inspired by Marina, to choose a place in the country that they were going to study that semester, that if they were to be tourists and visit that country, what would that place be, and then give some tips, and again, students had to read each other's recommendations and learn, get the tips, but then also further that discussion and engage in communication that way. Another thing, speaking of resources, again, what really on point to what Marina said, that especially when you have a course that large and you have 300 students, it's asynchronous. They cannot, you as the faculty, you provide as much support as you can, but there are also other resources that the students could and should use. So I make one of the introductory videos that I make for these courses, and I've actually I've started making them for all of my courses, is one that focuses specifically on resources. I have a section on the syllabus that talks about resources, and I have a video on that because I think it's really important. And so I talk about myself as a resource and really encourage students to use me as a resource and tell them about all the different ways that they can do that. But then also talk about all the other resources. If there are any teaching assistants where applicable, IT support, MESH, you're there as a resource. The psychological services, any types of accommodations that students might need, all the different resources that they could and should use. And then I'm always in touch with them. So if I notice that there's an issue, for example, I just had that recently with a particular assignment where more clarity could happen in some of the instructions. And I figured that out by noticing that a group of students, a subset of students had done something that was against what was meant for that particular assignment. And I raised that issue. And at first, my thought was that perhaps the students hadn't read the instructions carefully. And then some of the students got back to me and explained that, even after reading the instructions really carefully, I still have some doubts. And then I realized that there was something that I could do on my part as well to improve the situation. And so I did. So keeping those channels of communication open and encouraging students to reach out to the other resources, but to me as well in different ways, communicating with them in different ways, I find that's really helpful.
What I'm really hearing is several papers that we could be working on change management, continuous improvement, feedback mechanisms, and all of these things that we keep hitting on in our professional development series that you're incorporating into your teachings. This is so exciting for me because it helps me rethink what I'm doing right now with group work, with the resources I'm sharing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your insights and your best practices with us.
And actually, one more thing came to mind as Olivia was talking. Olivia, I did steal your weekly communication email, by the way. I guess this is the beauty of communities of practice. You never know how, little things can make a huge difference in your class. I've never had those, and I thought that Olivia was a uber organized person for having this weekly email, but it's not that hard to put together, and it makes a world of a difference for students. I get replies crystal clear. Thank you, instructor. Just, in this time of chaos and mess all around, having a little structure goes a long way. And just kind of related to that, when it comes to assignments to help students deal with adversity, I can't obviously solve their personal problems, but at least I can give them a little bit of flexibility when it comes to coursework. So what I've done is I've made my classes more flexible. So not easier, just more flexible, especially when it comes to things like assignments. If they can be open at the beginning of the semester and they won't make a difference when they're completed, open them up early on. Have them available for a longer period of time, not just on a given day at a given time. So try to work with schedules and try to accommodate, the outside life outside of school.
Yeah, and I think that flexibility and compassion that you have in your classes, I think it's what it will also result in better performance, better evaluations, and better long-term relationships with the students. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, Dr. Miljanic, Dr. Sebastianovic, for doing this with me and for both entertaining and educating our peers on how to do more and how to engage in our classrooms. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Working Wisdom podcast series from the C.T. Bauer College of Business, brought to you by the Inclusive Leadership Initiative. The initiative aims to develop inclusive leaders and family-friendly cultures that support business strategy and superior business performance. For more information about Bauer and this podcast series, visit www.bauer.uh.edu/podcast.